Hey, Donovan Keith here, and in this video I want to walk through how you can use scene nodes to easily outline or chamfer a spline interactively. And what I've done is created a generator that you can see in the Objects Manager called Round and Outline that allows me to adjust my outline thickness and the amount of rounding that's happening for my spline, and allowing me to go into my source spline and just rotate it, for example, to interactively adjust what's being created here. So I'm just taking these two input splines, I'm masking them, I'm doing a round and outline. I can adjust the width, I can adjust the amount of outlining, the amount of thickness here, and I can extrude as well. So let's walk over how this works and yeah, go from there. So I'm going to create a new project file. I'm going to go into my nodes layout, and then I like to hide my console over here. I'm just going to clear it out, and I move my viewport over to the right as well, just so I've got a nice big node editor, and this is especially important for tutorials when I've got just a single monitor here. And what I want to do is add a nodes spline. So I'm going to hit Shift-C to open my commander. It's the same thing as going over here and clicking here and choosing nodes spline. And a node spline is a special generator object that lets me use scene nodes to create a new spline. And let's just start by adding a rectangle. So double-clicking, choosing rectangle, dragging that out. And I'm going to connect this rectangle over here to the geometry output. I could do that by dragging the wire or by tapping down the Q key on my keyboard. I remember that as to connect to the output. It's a bit of a strained mnemonic, but it works. So I've got my rectangle. If I want, I can double click and add another node, and I'm going to search for outline. And I can drag the outline spline node right on top of this wire, and we can see that it's gotten a little bit thicker. You can kind of see what's going on there, and I can adjust the thickness, and I can also adjust whether it is aligned to the outside or the inside. I can choose whether I'm outputting just this input inside line or the outside, but let's just go with all for now, and align to 100%, and I'm just going to really crank up the thickness so we can see what's going on. Next, let's go ahead and add some rounding. So I'm going to go ahead and choose chamfer. So double click, searching for spline chamfer. And then I'm going to add that in. I want to, modify all of my points. So I don't care what's selected. I want to modify all points. I'm going to type in ALL for all. I'm going to do the same thing for my outline spline. It looks like it's automatically operating on all points, so we're great. The next thing I might want to do is figure out how I can get this to work with splines that live inside of the Objects Manager. Right now, I have to work in nodes the whole time. I can make it a little bit better by exposing some of my parameters. So for example, outline spline, I can command click on this little dot right here next to thickness. That's going to expose this parameter, and I can then drag a wire from this over here to the input bar and choose add new input. And I can do the same thing for spline chamfer. I'm going to change my chamfer mode or my offset mode here to radial, and I'm going to then command click on this little circle to expose that port, and I'm going to drag out a wire and choose add new input. So now if I click on my node spline, I've got a thickness adjustment and a radius adjustment. So the key parameters I need are there, but right now it's only working with this rectangle that is already inside of here. So I'm going to delete this rectangle, and I'm going to add a rectangle spline in my Objects Manager, and I'm going to make it a child of my node spline. So I now need a way for the node spline to get its child as an input. And I can do that by right-clicking on this input palette here, choosing Add Input, and then I want to choose Object Child. Now, when I first do this, it just sort of disappears, and there's no error code because it's sort of built to tolerate faults silently. well, actually, rather, it's disappeared because it is actually consuming the child, excuse me, but nothing is happening because the geometry isn't being sort of consumed or eaten here. Just because I like the look of it, I'm going to drag geometry slightly above matrix, and then I'm going to drag this object child input out so that I can now connect my geometry to my outline spline. So now my child input is coming in, and it is being outlined. And if I make this editable and take a look at my points, let's say, it's looking okay. That's all right. If I was to come in here and let's try and use a spline mask to manipulate this object. So I'm going to take my rectangle, maybe make it a little bit wider. I'm going to duplicate this. Let's make it a bit narrower. And now I'm going to use a spline mask to combine these two like so. And I get something like this. If I make it editable, I look at my points. It's still, pretty minimal. That's good. If I was to add to one of these rectangles its own rounding, like so, and then make it editable, we'd see that there are a ton of points that have been generated. And that is because Cinema 4D, I'm just hitting undo to get back to my rectangles here, splines exist as sort of two things. Splines exist as a curve with a few simple points that you draw, but they also exist as this tessellated representation, and that tessellation is sort of controlled down here, where every 5 degrees of angle change in this curve, it's going to add an intermediate point. And I can see what this looks like when I do current state to object, and I look at the element that has been made editable, and we can see it's actually a series of linear spline segments or line segments connecting them. So that is your tessellated spline. And most of Cinema 4D, most of the time, is passing around the tessellated version of an object. When a deformer gets it, it's getting the tessellated version. Splines are sort of this special case where some of the time it's the tessellated version that gets passed along, and some of the time, if you're really nice, it'll give you the original spline points. So that's what we need to do, is convince this node spline. It doesn't just want the tessellated spline. It wants a real spline with that simple parametric definition. So I'm going to rename this from object child to spline child. I'm going to right click on this port and choose edit port. And I'm going to click on the advanced tab here. And in the import spline as section, I want to change from line tessellated to spline maintain points. So what this means is even if my object is deformed, I'm only going to get the very simple points that make up my spline. If I was to choose spline maintain shape, if my object is deformed, it's going to give me the tessellated and deformed version of my spline, but that's going to give me a lot of points, and things like rounding, outline don't respond super well to tons of points. So I'm just going to try spline maintain points, and we'll just know that it's not going to work super well if we are dealing with deformed splines as inputs. So I choose spline maintain points. Now this port is looking for a spline, and it's giving us the result. If I come in here and I rotate this object, it's sort of behaving as expected. If I come in here and take my spline mask and rotate it, however, it is not updating in the way that we would expect. And that's because these input objects, when you just grab their geometry, that's just the definition of where all of the points live in their home base. But their home base is controlled by the matrix or the transform here. So we need to take all of the points from this child space and transform them into the node spline space. So I'm going to come in here and add a transform node, transform geometry, and I'm going to connect geometry and this matrix and connect the output here to output spline. So now if I take my spline mask and rotate it, it is updating as we would expect, and I can now update this child. Now, there's some quirky behavior that happens if you try and chamfer with a 0 radius, and it's just doing work that it doesn't need to do. So let's add in a check to see if the spline chamfer has a radius. So I'm going to choose to add an if node. And the condition is, does it have a radius? So any value that's not 0 is going to evaluate as true. And I want to choose which geometry to output depending. So if it is got a radius, I want to output some geometry, and I want to output the chamfered spline. If it doesn't have a radius, I want to output just this original outline like so. And so now if I adjust my node spline, I can adjust the thickness, I can set my radius down to 0, and everything is functioning as expected. And I can now call this outline and chamfer spline. If this is something you want to use repeatedly, you can choose to save it to your assets browser. So you could do something like go to your assets browser, drag it into there, and then you've got a little preset that you can use. Otherwise, just copy and paste the scene, or just rebuild it each time you want to have this effect. So there you go. This is how you can use a combination of just a few nodes and a little bit of a secret handshake here with the spline child in order to get a nice outlined effect. Yeah, there you go. I hope that this is helpful.